Donald Trump, we know this. He doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke, he doesn't take any recreational drugs that we know of. But Donald Trump has a different kind of addiction, I guess we could call it. He's addicted to feeling like he is powerful, even if he's not really powerful. Often he's not. He lives for the dopamine rush that comes with big public displays that make him feel strong and important. Actions that feed his fragile ego and quell all of his insecurities, and there are many. I mean, he kind of suggested as much last month, saying out loud when he publicly admitted to having a possessive and addictive type personality. Just the kind of person you want in the White House, right? Now, Trump craves the high that comes from the public displays of power so much that he doesn't concern himself with the consequences of his actions. Because by the time the dust finally settles, he's already chasing his next dopamine hit. And Donald Trump's decision to invade a foreign country and arrest its president is kind of a perfect example of this. I mean, he relished the images of the dramatic overnight raid to capture Nicolas Maduro, who I would note is not a good guy. He's a very bad guy and a very corrupt guy, but still. Trump loved the scene of Maduro being perp-walked off a plane in his tracksuit into an American prison. He even told his favorite Fox Morning program, quote, "I watched it like I was watching a television show. The speed, the violence, it was an amazing thing." That's the president of the United States, everybody, saying that. See, for him, this is all about the spectacle, about the images of toughness and conquest. It's why he's obsessed with the idea that the U.S. is now going to take their oil. It's a fantasy he's been fixated on for almost 40 years, seizing oil wherever the U.S. can flex its military might.
We got to go in and take over their oil. I have no doubt about it. Other people would say, "Oh, Donald, that might start a war." We're going to have a war through weakness. You go and you take over the oil and let them have the rest of their country. We just want the oil.
Why aren't we getting it? Why don't we get some of it? Why don't we just take over the oil? We should take it over. You have to go in and take the oil.
Knock the hell out of them. Take the oil. We thereby take their wealth. Right. We take all their wealth.
If we're going to get out, take the oil. The great oil companies, they'll rebuild that sucker brand new. It'll be beautiful. And I'd ring it, and I'd take the oil.
Okay, so Trump has clearly fantasized about doing this for a very, very long time. That goes back many, many years. Well, tonight, in a post on Truth Social, Trump announced that Venezuela would be turning over between 30 to 50 million barrels of, quote, high-quality sanctioned oil to the United States of America. And that money from that oil will be, in his words, controlled by him. Now, there's so many questions here. For context, though, 30 to 50 million barrels of oil is roughly equivalent to the amount of oil the U.S. produces every 3 to 4 days. So this is not exactly a huge windfall to start with. But setting that aside, how is this supposed to work? What legal basis does the U.S. have to seize any country's oil? What does he mean when he says it will be controlled by him? And what does Venezuela get in return, which I expect a lot of national security reporters are looking into right now? None of this feels particularly well thought out. Lots of questions. Trump doesn't care, though, because just like with everything else he does, once the high of the announcement wears off, there is no plan for what comes next. Which is why 3 days after their attack on Venezuela, the Trump administration still hasn't given us any clear indication of what their long-term plan is for the country they're apparently pillaging for oil. I mean, the morning after the raid on Maduro's home, the morning of the raid, I should say, Trump was asked who is in charge of Venezuela. And this is what he said.
It's largely going to be, for a period of time, the people that are standing right behind me. We're going to be running it. We're going to be bringing it back.
So the people standing behind the president, you can see them there. You recognize all of them. In that moment were Trump advisor Stephen Miller, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. And in the days since those men got that assignment from Donald Trump, while they stood right behind him, they have made pretty clear they are not exactly interested in the assignment. I mean, asked about this process, his role in the process yesterday, Stephen Miller passed the buck to Marco Rubio.
Stephen, you were a part of that group, the select group that the president said is his staff that is running Venezuela. What exactly are your day-to-day responsibilities?
The President of the United States has asked Secretary Rubio, who also happens to be his national security advisor, to directly, of course, under the president's close guidance and direction, to be the lead on this process.
Who, me? Was I standing there when he said that? I think the president was talking about my buddy Marco Rubio. Over to you, Secretary Rubio.
Mr. Secretary, who is in charge? Are you running Venezuela right now?
Yeah, I mean, I keep people, fixating on that. Here's the bottom line on it is we expect to see changes in Venezuela.
Who are those people who will be running the country specifically?
Well, it's not running, it's running policy. The policy with regards to this. We want Venezuela to move in a certain direction.
So is the United States running Venezuela right now?
Well, I've explained once again, I'll do it one more time. What we are running is the direction that this is going to moving forward.
Are you running Venezuela right now?
George, I've explained again that the leverage that we have here is the leverage of the quarantine. So that is a Department of War operation.
People are so fixated on this. I'm not really running it. This is really a Department of War operation. Okay. Over to you, Pete Hegseth. Does that mean maybe you're in charge?
Well, it means we set the terms. President Trump sets the terms, and ultimately he'll decide what the iterations are of that.
So Trump left the future of Venezuela to his three lackeys on the podium. Stephen Miller says Marco Rubio's in charge. Marco Rubio says this is a Defense Department operation. And Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth passed the buck back to Donald Trump. That's what just happened there. Nobody wants to actually deal with the fallout of Trump's decisions. But none of that buck passing has prompted Trump to maybe pause for a moment and make a plan with his national security team, with Congress, on how exactly this is all going to go down in the country he just attacked, including what happens to the 30 million people who live there, including, and said he's already moved on and started searching for, you guessed it, his big next dopamine hit, singling out the next countries he may target next.
Colombia is very sick, too, run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States, and he's not going to be doing it very long.
So there will be an operation by the U.S.
It sounds good to me.
Yeah.
By the way, you have to do something with Mexico. Mexico has to get their act together. We need Greenland from a national security situation. Cuba is ready to fall.
Yes.
Cuba looks like it's ready to fall.
I've never seen Senator Graham so excited, really, about anything. But look, the fate of Venezuela after Maduro is still a huge unknown. There are a lot of questions. But Trump's already looking for his next conquest, the next Latin American leader he can topple, or a Danish territory he can seize to make himself feel big and strong. And none of this is new for Donald Trump. I mean, we have seen just how destructive his insatiable cravings for power and attention can be. It's basically been the theme throughout his time in public life. And it has made for some very dark moments in this country. Today, of course, marks the 5th anniversary of the January 6th siege on the U.S. Capitol, the worst attack on our nation's capital in more than 200 years. And it's worth remembering what prompted that attack. Trump's fragile ego, his uncontrollable urge to hold on to power and stay in the limelight. That's the reason he whipped up his supporters into a frenzy that day with no concern for what the consequences of that decision would be. As Special Counsel Jack Smith told Congress last month, the January 6th attack does not happen without Donald Trump. And Trump's addiction to power is why January 6th happened and why he has never been able to let it go. It is why he pardoned or commuted the sentences of every single rioter from that day. It's why today the administration unveiled an official White House webpage selling a completely fabricated revisionist history about that day, one that refers to the rioters as patriots who marched to the Capitol and blames Capitol Police for escalating tensions, which is insane and offensive. It even accuses Trump's own vice president, who the mob called to be hanged, of an act of cowardice and sabotage. And of course, it falsely and ludicrously blames then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi for security lapses at the Capitol, which, in addition to being completely inaccurate, sort of undermines the whole idea that the rioters were themselves patriots. So think about that as well. Today, House Democrats held their own January 6th hearing to set the record straight about what really happened that day. It featured testimony from police officers who defended the Capitol, a reformed January 6th rioter who takes accountability for her actions that day, and she gave an incredibly powerful testimony, and of course Nancy Pelosi herself, who responded to the allegations that the Trump administration lobbed at her.
The president is always saying to me, well, you weren't ready. I wasn't ready for a president of the United States. Yeah, I wasn't ready for a president of the United States to incite an insurrection against the Congress of the United States, against the Constitution, against the Capitol of the United States. No, who would be ready for that? But we are ready to save our democracy. The times have found us to do that.
Donald Trump is what she wasn't ready for. It's what none of us were ready for. But now we know exactly who he is. A man who is so addicted to power, he'll topple any person or institution or country he can hold on to it.